Good deal. Well, Howard, it's wonderful to meet you, sir. Thank you for taking a minute out today.
Yes. Yeah. Well, glad to meet you, and it's glad to hear your weather's been pretty good up there in Kansas City. Yeah.
Yeah, where are you located?
I'm in Dallas, and we've been having again what I'd call a very light winter. Yeah, very little.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep, for sure. Well, it's great to meet you. I'm looking forward to getting into your books and getting into your world. So before we do that, I know before we got on, we touched a little bit on COVID, but that pandemic was really quite a thing for us to survive. How many ripples did that create in your life that is still a part of your world now, getting through the pandemic?
Well, it's actually done a lot of change, if you will, from face to face, even going to the office and working with employees now over the podcast as opposed to over the desktop, and so it's changed even the job market. Again, uh, companies are trying to force people to come back to the office, and people are quitting their job rather than go back to the office. So I've seen a lot of it in the industrial side, but it's also on the family side. The numbers of people that go to the Christmas dinner.
Yeah.
Half of the people don't show up, and I think it's over their still ongoing fear. Although this year we did have all three of the girls uh, available for, but that's like I say, it's been 2 or 3 years since they would all want to get in the same room together with their husbands and so on. It's just so yeah. Even the behavior of people and the getting together in the social climate has been affected by the COVID, and then the conflict over COVID. How could we have a conflict over COVID?
Yeah.
With it's but we have, and we even have people saying, "Geez, we don't need polio shots anymore." Well, since I've been around, I happen to remember those polio shots and visiting some of my friends with polio, and I haven't had to do that anymore.
Yeah.
so, so I sort of think, those processes work and
Yeah.
have been working, and we still have people that somehow have a conflict with something as simple as solving a medical problem for people with drugs and various forms of injections.
Yeah.
Boy, it's crazy.
It is. It's crazy how science has become debatable. It's a weird
Yeah,
world we live in, you know? Um,
yeah.
so let me get to the heart and soul of what you do for a living right now, and even what your career has been. I'm going to put you in front of a bunch of grade school kids. It's third graders, let's say. It's career day. One of the kids is curious and is like, "Hey, what do you do for a living?" How do you answer them?
Well, I was one of the lucky people who got associated with people who wanted to do new things that would help people.
Yeah.
So I made things that today you call a modem and a telephone and a handset and your little PC and your Atari. And I was the guy who was working in the corner, gluing those little pieces together for you so that you could actually play Pong on your TV. And today we're having video conferences on the kinds of things that we were working on all the way back in 1960s, and it just took 30 or 40 years to make all of this stuff work. And what that did is it got me associated with people because we're trying to find solve one of their problems, and they would buy our magic equipment. So we would find things to solve, and some of those things were communications. Some of them were uh, we got rid of the typewriter. You can now talk to your computer, and your computer does all of your typing, and you don't have to type. When I grew up, we didn't have a computer and you had to type. And along the way, we got rid of the typing and replaced it with a keyboard, and now replaced the keyboard. So that's what I've been doing most of my life, and most of the time working on what were thought of as impossible. And how do you actually make a video conference call when you don't even have a phone?
Yeah.
Well, we took care of that for you, and you now have a phone.
So you also are a writer. How did that happen? Talk to me about how you got into writing.
Well, back when the internet was starting, no one knew what it was to begin with. So I had to write a book for all intents and purposes that, in effect, was the basics of how do you do the network? What is all of this stuff called TCP/IP and internet and modems and even computers and keyboards? So my first book was actually the basics of traffic and network design for a digital network because there had never been a digital network. And as we were making it, like I say, we had to explain to engineers what we even wanted them to do because we were talking to them in digital and they were thinking in analog. So it was that was my first book, and my second book was similar. In wrote that in the 2000 time frame, which was the coming of streaming television. We called it back then IPTV. Today you call it Netflix. Back then we called it Blockbuster, and no one could believe that somebody was going to take all of those CDs and Blockbusters and throw on your TV on demand.
Yeah.
But that was the intent, and we wrote a book about the basics of IPTV and how it would create social media,
Yeah.
uh, Facebook, time, uh, various kinds of social medias, including this one, that would become overnight growth and replacing meetings in the office and no longer needing to fly to go to a business meeting. So fundamentally, we could see with all of this video and audio capability that things would change dramatically in the way people even did their job as well as entertainment.
So talk to me about your latest book.
Well, back in the 2014, we started to see that there was things going wrong with our communications processes in a way that I could manipulate people. It was that simple. And changing their opinions and focusing their attentions on crazy things. But so I wrote a book saying over the last 50 years, we've been having it pretty good, but we've been making some pretty bad mistakes. Our standard of living is actually lower than it was in 1980 when we were going down this path. And we've dropped from number one standard of living to number eight in 2020. But in 2016, the book came out was on candidate assessment. It was saying you're making some pretty bad choices locally as well as federal level. But yeah, we have red state conflict of people still running poor education systems and low wage exploitation and other uh, places saying we need to increase the minimum wage. and actually having states saying, no, we don't want our people to make any more money. We don't think we need a higher living. Oh, are you crazy? How can you come to that conclusion that you don't want people to have higher wages? Uh, but that's why my book in that time frame was about candidate assessment, because we were seemingly making some really bad choices.
Yeah.
And then in uh, the 2024 timeframe, uh, we had sort of gone and flipped a coin and moved in both directions in an 8 year period, turning left and turning right, and that sort of says there's still confusion. so,
Yeah.
so that's why I wrote the book. Uh, the place where I grew up in the 1980s and 90s and 2000 has been jeopardized.
Yeah.
And that's why I wrote the book of how to save a nation from old conservative lies, because there were certain things they were saying uh, that were uh, lies is the only way to finally address the issue. It's not an opinion. It is just basically they're lying to affect your opinion of decisions that you might make.
Yeah.
And it goes as simply as putting tariffs on. We have a president who is going to close the border, deport 10 million people, and put a tariff war in place to see if he can drive up prices for the consumers. Now, you can make that sound any way you want, but that's what the man says he wants to do. And he says that tariffs don't drive up prices. And you say, well, mechanically, it's just, or scientifically, it's just inane to
Yeah.
believe that you can have a tariff war without higher prices.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just that's that simple.
I am totally in the boat you're rowing for sure. I understand it doesn't make any sense. And we go back to that scientific thing, the empiricism, like how have we deviated so much from fact and fiction? And I remember a friend told me one time when we were really breaking down all these conspiracies and all these things that we're told that aren't true, we have gotten to a point where we're so saturated with information, everybody's confused.
That's the intent, and that's why the things don't seem to be lies, because what they've done is make it so that you don't believe anything.
Yeah.
And if you don't believe anything, it's very difficult for you to make a decision about what to do next.
Yeah.
So that pause for crazy stuff like, well, and again, and I'm not knocking per se just Trump, because yeah, he's got an awful lot of people standing behind him. Think it's a great idea to, well, we're going to attack Canada next, green the island, and steal the Panama Canal back from Panama. Oh, wait a minute, that was called manifest destiny back in the 1840s, and
Yeah.
I think we had a civil war about that stuff. And we may have snagged Texas and California and stole all that from Mexico and Spain, but I don't think you can get Canada to surrender, to send Toronto to back to the American Republic, or Greenland, or and certainly the Panama Canal Zone. That's been 100 years where we've been trying to get the canal to work. No, we've had the canal working for 100 years, and suddenly we have, because they're charging us or some whatever the excuse is, we're going to take back the Panama Canal. Wow,
Yeah.
that's right out of the Dark Ages.
Yeah, that certainly is. So I'm curious, take me back to your childhood. How did these seeds of getting into technology and then getting into writing and politics, how did all of that, those seeds get planted in you?
Well, again, I'm lucky enough to get a job in a company that back then was called AT&T, and T, and it was a different kind of AT&T than we know today. But when they hired you, you in effect were in a union, a strong union, and the union and the company worked together, and the union had somehow gotten the company to agree to pay for people going to school. I mean, I'm working in a company that never dawned on me that a company would pay you to go to school, but they did. They would, and if you got an A, they gave you all of your money back. If you got a B, you got 90%. If you got a C, so suddenly I was actually caring about my grades. So the company taught me to care. I didn't care about grades when I was going through high school. It
Yeah.
was stay above sea level so you didn't drown. That was all. And, avoid your parents beating you up for getting a D. That was the concept of. But through that process with the telephone company, they then started to send me to schools because I was in this co-op program. So instead of climbing on telephone poles in January, I was out in Bell Laboratories learning about things that they were talking about digital coming into bear and so they taught me about digital switches and computers and at the time we had just cut the first digital computer into the telephone company, and suddenly I'm some kid from Cleveland out in Bell Laboratories looking at one.
Yeah.
There's only one in the country, and I'm looking at the practice one that they've been working on. So yeah, I then continued on through the process with the phone company, going to switching schools and transmission schools, and staying with going through the Cuyahoga Community College, graduating, going on to Cleveland State, and started to, again, because of the teachers and the higher education process, started to get to be more enthused about writing. It was no longer a penalty that you had to pay to turn in reports. You actually started to write reports that were to convey information and sway opinions, and not just report on who shot up who in the war 40 years ago. So that was the transition that I got out of my work company called AT&T at the time, but it was Bell Labs switching transmission systems. And I started to get to meet people who were working on strange things and talking about strange things. I got to meet Dr. Larry Roberts, one of the founders of the internet, who really just wanted to make a computer go 10 miles, that the two computers could talk to each other. And I was in the group of people trying to make a modem that would make that work. And then some other groups of people were trying to route it. And I was sitting there saying, you really, we've never had to have a computer talk to another computer. Why do you want to do that? And why don't you put them in the same building and that solves the problem? And they could explain this thing called the internet, but you couldn't conceive it because of you just couldn't believe that you could throw all of these bits in the sky or on a wire or on a cable, and it would come out the other end. And I got to meet people who were trying to create a thing called Ethernet. It wasn't called Ethernet when it started,
Yeah.
uh, and I don't know who made the joke and made the name Ethernet, but it was. Sort of a joke that the sunshine is ether,
Yeah.
and we're going to make information ether.
Yeah.
And somehow Ethernet stuck, and you just throw this stuff around, and it gets to where you want it to go, and
Yeah.
you pass on information. So that's why I then started to. I had the chance to join a company called TRW, and T made hard goods and mechanical steel things in stamping plants, and that's what the T stood for. But R&W was the guys called Ramo and Woldridge, who were part of TRW doing satellite stuff and rocket ships.
Yeah.
So again, I got to work with an awful lot of very forward-thinking people, and yeah, they were going to the moon.
Yeah.
TRW had popped up there with the place called Space Center today is I think Grumman Space Center, but that originally was TRW
Yeah.
Space Center,
Yeah.
and we worked on those kinds of next generation things, including digital video and compression of video. We were trying to talk about compressing video, and the other people were trying to talk about regular television. And we were talking about high definition television.
Yeah.
And they would say, oh, you can't, there is no way you can do that. And somebody was saying, well, the biggest problem is data compression.
Yeah.
It was not computers anymore. It was algorithms and mathematics, and again, I got to see through that process and had to write articles about it because no one could understand. Uh, they could understand what IMAX was doing, and they could understand what high definition TV was doing, but they didn't understand the difference. And IMAX TV had 10 films pulling in front of a, might as well have been a candle, but it was a light bulb with a film ripping in front of it, just like it had been in 1901. And they could put it on a great big screen and it looked fantastic. And we were working with a company called NEC, and they had this little electric computer that could put a 70-foot screen up there at high definition, 1080 P or I, and you said no one understood what was the difference between P and I. Well, yeah, you will in the future, but for right now, don't worry about it. But
Yeah.
yes, we spent a lot of time writing articles about the step to digital video, and if you started down this step. Somewhere along the line, the government wouldn't want you wasting all that bandwidth with your analog television. And it was about 2009, and I guess we did the digital evolution in the 1992. By 2009, you couldn't make an analog television broadcast.
Yeah.
The government was saying, "You guys all got to go digital,"
Yeah.
and we were helping people make that transition and writing articles and uh, going to communities and explaining to them how we were going to make the walkie-talkie a cell phone.
Yeah. For sure. Yeah. The amazing leap. So, of all of this technology that you've experienced, of all these things that you've accomplished, what are you the proudest of in your career?
Oh, I would say it was the evolution of switching and being part of that process.
Yeah.
It used to be switching worked sort of like a hard wire, and I could move what wire was connected to which other wire with a screwdriver, and then finally I learned how to do it electronically. But we had some other people like Dr. Larry Roberts and so on who were talking about packets. We were just going to throw all these bits in a bucket, and we were one of the first people to get that bucket to work. At TRW, we needed it in Bishop, California, uh, because the Space Center happened to be in California and the moon happened to be up on the moon.
Yeah.
So, so this little town called Bishop was the first place. Now, again, I shouldn't say AT&T had cut a telephone company switch into service about 2 weeks earlier in California. No, in Chicago. But yeah, here we were, just a bunch of crazy kids out in Bishop, switching data calls between the moon and the Earth, and we had to keep that undercover so no one knew we were doing that. So we did the test with the telephone company, where they hooked up the long distance carrier, Continental Telephone Company, to this magic switch in somewhere in Bishop, California, which is the desert, the middle of nowhere, you know, troops all around. But yeah, so that was the first, and that was probably the funniest, because no one could understand what we were doing, but they could see that this this stuff had to be coming in on the wire,
Yeah.
because I mean on the radio, because there were no wires to the moon, so they had to believe it was somehow all of that stuff really is there hidden, and it's coming out this end and ringing that phone.
Yeah. That's amazing.
So that was probably the biggest fun, and then explaining that and going around the countryside,
Yeah.
telling people this stuff actually works.
Yeah.
This is not coming. It's going in and
Yeah.
going into places that some of them were big time, big name places, but there was other people that were what they used to call co-ops,
Yeah.
which were this little community, and they ran their own phone company back, and they put in all their own wires, and they put in all their own telephone poles, and there was about 1,300 of them in the United States, which were just little home friend owned phone company, and one of them wanted to put this stuff in, and you sit and say, yeah, if you want to, we'd love to upgrade this little telephone company in the middle of nowhere. And they became a tech center down in Dallas, because yeah, they were so far advanced compared to Austin, Texas. It's
Sure.
a little town on the outskirts of Austin,
Yeah.
that
It's
the
fascinating.
people actually built their own first digital switching studios and
Wow.
digital central offices, and yeah, they
That's
became
amazing.
a tech hub.
That's awesome. So I'm curious if anyone wants to pick up a copy of How to Save the Nation from Old Conservative Lies, where do they go to do that? Or if they want to reach out to you, learn more, how can they do that?
Well, I'm at howardgunn.com on the internet. There's a web page up there. And the book is available at almost all of the regular places: Amazon, BookBub, Goodreads, Ingram's, uh, Star, and so on. Virtually every place on the web is carrying the book,
Okay.
and most of them are recognizing, the idea of a small central government doing nothing, and avoiding the the Constitution mandates that you promote the general welfare, and states and people who don't want to promote the general welfare are part of that old lies system. So they can find it. They can find it even in their own homeschooling processes. I've developed that relationship with some of the school publishers like Ingram, and they publish the books for small school systems and independent at home, so they can publish it and publish it pretty inexpensively. If it's an educational system gets a special discount and so on.
Okay, excellent. Well, I urge everyone to go out and pick up a copy. Thank you so much for your story. It's been fascinating. I appreciate it. And have a wonderful 2025.
Same to you. You have a great new year coming and have fun at it. And we'll talk to
Absolutely.
you soon. Thank
You
you
bet.
much.
Thank you, sir. Take care.